Welcome to the Pod Like a Pro podcast, where you can gain insights and tips into podcasting so you can do it like the professionals. I'm Liz and I'm from Pod and Pen Productions, and I'd like to acknowledge the storytelling traditions of the Awabakal people whose land I'm on as I'm recording this podcast. For this episode, we are talking to a finalist in this year's Australian Podcast Awards. Now, we made this podcast together. It was an absolute joy to make. Sarah Spence, founder and CEO of the Content Rebels and host of the Content Rebels podcast. Welcome and congratulations.
Thank you. It's very exciting.
It really, really is. I'm so glad that we have got to this space where this fabulous podcast is being recognised.
Yes, me too. I definitely did not expect, when we started out on the journey of working together to plan, it was never even on the cards for us. It was very much a, look, we want to give podcasting a go and we want to work with an expert so that we can nail it first time. And I mean, I don't know if there's any better example of the fact that we have nailed it, where we've ended up with an Australian Podcast Awards finalist nomination for the business podcast category among some incredible other business podcasts. So yeah, really thrilled.
Yeah, it's very exciting. And so you've already spoken a little bit there about that process, that initial process, which was where we all got together, some of your team, some of my team, and we had this big brainstorm. We talked about why you wanted to make the podcast, what it would look like if it was successful, who are some of the people you'd really love to chat to if we had a dream team and everybody was going to say yes. From there, we basically put together a plan and it slowly built and grew from that strategy session. So it's been a long road, I suppose.
It was so much more involved than I realised, but in a really necessary way. And I think the results, the downloads we've had, the feedback we've had on the podcast reflect the fact that we did all of that work. The process was fantastic, particularly leaning on your team for the expertise about what would work well in an audio environment. So we sat down to begin with, we got all of our team together and kind of said, look, this is what we do. This is the way that we approach things as a content marketing agency. This is how we're different. And I remember we put forward, this is what we think would be a good idea for a podcast, what we should focus on. And your team were very much like, okay, cool, well, let's actually workshop that, because you guys very much brought ideas to the table about how things would work in an audio environment, as opposed to just on a digital marketing environment, which of course we're very familiar with, a visual and a written environment. You guys brought the expertise in terms of audio. And in fact, we did quite fundamentally shift the focus of the podcast based on your advice, and it absolutely worked then. I think what we'd originally planned to do would have landed a lot more softly. And this had the punch that we wanted.
Yeah, I often say that good production is a bit like a clean house. You don't notice it. And I think that this podcast speaks to that really well, because there is so much that actually goes into making this. And you'll know, because we were there and we re-recorded the intro bits and these thinking moments that you have that has really sort of set you up. It gave you a space to have those thoughts, which was really lovely. But there's lots of little bits and pieces that go into creating this soundscape that works really well, but there's a lot in it. What did you learn through the process?
I think one of the, perhaps somewhat selfishly in a way, one of the learnings for me was something I've kind of, you hear your own voice, sometimes you're like, oh God, that's annoying. Well, what I've learned through the process is that actually in an audio podcast environment like that, my voice isn't annoying to other people. Well, not from the feedback I've received anyway. So that was a nice personal learning. But from a process and just expectation environment and learning, there was so much more to it than I expected. And I definitely think if I had gone into it trying to do it myself, I would have done 2 episodes and I would have gone, oh my gosh, too hard basket. I think there's plenty of people out there who do that and they just get started. And I think if that's what you want to do, then go for it. But the benefit of working with a production team is that you are already told about all the various pitfalls before they happen, and therefore you avoid them. So it took a lot of time, especially initially, but we saved so much time in the long run by doing that.
Yeah, because there's so much of that we can take off your plate for you, in that we can organise guests, we can write scripts, we can, do those recordings, and we actually sit in with you on those recordings, whether they're remote or in a studio. So we did those recordings, most of them remotely, but we'd set up the microphones for you, so we knew that everything was good to go, and then I was there sort of running the interview for you as well. But there is so much still that you're the host, so you've got to be engaged, and I can't take that bit of work off you, and listening back and making sure that what we're about to put out into the world is something that you want out into the world. How was that experience for you, having me, I suppose, in the interview studio set up with you and making all of that? Because I think for some people that can be comforting. For others it might feel a little bit weird having somebody in there as a sort of eavesdropping and controlling it all.
Oh, that's interesting. It was, I didn't feel that, but I guess I'm on so many Zoom calls, so it wasn't weird to me to have you there as another person as part of the call, but it was, gosh, was it invaluable, because you and I would be, I'd have Zoom up on one side interviewing the person, and I'd have our working doc on the other side of my screen. And in that working doc was like our list of questions. But if the interview guest started speaking about a particular topic or was giving certain examples or whatever, you were there at the time, like going and researching that stuff and putting that into the doc and suggesting other questions and other ways to take the conversation. And also if there was ever like there was one guest where we had a few audio issues, and you and I were like quickly typing to each other going, is that an audio issue on your end? And I was able to keep the conversation flowing whilst also knowing that you were there as backup. And just all of that, all of the fundamentals around the actual recording and the quality that you need and all of those things, you just totally took care of that and only flagged for me if there was an issue. Whereas, and on that one particular recording where there was an issue and we did end up re-recording, we decided to, you guys tried to, in post-production, to try to resolve the issues that there were. But in the end, we decided, look, it's just not the quality that we're after. So that guest very graciously allowed us to re-record with her. But I wouldn't have known that there was an issue going on really if you weren't there. And then I would have got to the end of that and then tried to listen to it back or send it off to an audio engineer or whatever and being told, look, it's all done. Whereas at least we were able to work with the guest and try to resolve the issues on the call.
And that can be those things, they're just the unknowns that happen on the day, and you don't know. And it ended up being that the particular guests, it was an issue with the headphones that they were using were interfering with the audio. But it was a really hard thing to know that was what was actually going on. And it was an overseas interview as well. So there was a few different aspects happening there. I think that's a good lesson for anyone making a podcast as well, is that if you do find that the audio isn't quite up to scratch, it's okay to ask for another interview. It's hard to do, but it's okay, because it's a tricky thing. Now, I would like to play a little moment of the podcast back to you, if that's okay. It was really hard to pick one bit to play because I love listening to all of them. But I thought that this conversation that you had with Cherie Clonan from the Digital Picnic really spoke to what you were trying to do with the podcast, in that it's two female leaders talking together. And there was this moment that highlights some of those insights that you both had, that I think it was just so nice as a listener to be able to listen in to the thoughts of these two very successful female leaders in marketing in Australia today. So let's take a listen, okay?
Okay, yeah, I'm interested to hear it.
I launched into it in October 2014, no business plan. Telling my husband I'm just going to teach a couple of social media workshops on a weekend and see how it all works out. It's working out. So who would have thunk it?
So hang on a sec. I just want to pause. Cherie and the Digital Picnic did something there that at first thought most people wouldn't think would actually work. They were teaching people, but then offering to do for them the thing that they'd just taught them. And that's the whole thing about digital marketing. It's complex, it's big, it's a whole team thing. You can't just do it as an individual. And when people find that out, well, it does make more sense to hand it over And the cost makes more sense too. And when you think about it that way, suddenly that doesn't sound like a strange idea. But it's not the only winning formula for TDP. There's something else, something radically different.
I don't know. Sometimes in those, vulnerable neurodivergent moments, I wonder, am I approaching this the wrong way? I don't know. But I can't be anything other than, radically authentic, radically transparent, just, radically real. All of the radicals, really.
So it was a long time ago now that we did that interview. How does it feel to listen back?
It feels lovely, actually. Cherie's an absolute gem, and I can hear she would say exactly the same thing today as she said, 12 months ago. But it's funny because, we did so much planning and then it rolled into production and we were pumping out the episodes and then it all went live. And, there's still quite a few downloads every month, which is nice. It's obviously got value as a bit of an evergreen an evergreen podcast. And we did talk about some things that were kind of trending in 2023 and the like. But ultimately, I think there's value in each of the episodes that still stands today. And it was really about exploring the marketing landscape today in all of its various forms and how it's just, there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. And it is, as I said, they're radically different. There are so many radically different ways to be approaching it. And I think it was also a bit of therapy for me to kind of figure out that because we as an agency do things quite differently, that's not a bad thing, that it's actually part of our kind of, secret formula is to be rebellious, to go against the grain. And that's exactly what Cherie's like too.
Yeah, which is so great. Now that we're a little bit removed from when the first season came out, I wonder what benefits you've seen, both from people just saying, oh, wow, that was a great podcast, but also have you actually seen any clients, any new staff, any relationships that you formed during the podcast that are now ongoing?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, all of the above. All of the above to that response. But yeah, I mean, look, of course, the number one thing you want to see whenever you invest in any kind of marketing is a return on investment. Ultimately, it's lovely to do marketing, but if you're not seeing a return, then that's not ideal. But for us, definitely, we had a really strong return on investment. It wasn't overnight, that's for sure. But we did have one particular client come to us I'm going to say about 6 months after the podcast first launched. They reached out to us. They were keen to work with us. And in fact, her exact words were, I just want to hear how you'll do it specifically for us, because you don't need to sell us on you or on the agency or your approach. I've listened to the entire podcast and I'm completely on board. So that was a really awesome thing. And that one particular client, for instance, well and truly, the revenue was far greater than what we spent actually doing the podcast. So return on investment has definitely been positive. And then all of the other beautiful, heartwarming bits of feedback. So many people commented that the sound was awesome. And quite a number of people were also like, look, I listen to lots of different kind of podcasts like this, and they're always, a bit grainy, or you can kind of tell they've just been recorded on their phones or whatever. And yours was just a really nice listening experience. And I must say, the person whose feedback I take on the most in this space is my dad. He is a prolific podcast listener, a prolific audio listener. And he gave it 25 thumbs up in terms of the audio quality and the mix. And he also said, look, it was really engaging because I could tell that you, as in me, were really engaged the whole time. And you were also kind of building that engagement and that sense of a collaboration and interest with your guests. And he said it was a really beautiful listening experience because you could tell you were just genuinely both, whoever you were interviewing, were genuinely both interested in the conversation. So that was also really great.
Oh, that is wonderful. I couldn't get a better feedback than getting 25 thumbs up from your dad.
I know. It's a pretty big compliment.
All right, Sarah Spence, thank you so much for your time today, and thank you for trusting in us to help you make the Content Rebels podcast. I will put a link in the show notes so that everyone can listen back to it again if they haven't caught it yet.
Excellent. And even if you don't listen to it right now, please do follow it as well, because season 2 is coming. I know it's pretty much close on a year since we launched, but we've been busy bees, probably because of the podcast, to be fair, and so I need to carve out a bit more time to get through to season 2. But season 2 is coming at some point, and it's going to be an even deeper exploration of all the rebellious things in the marketing world. So even if you don't listen right now, please go in and follow, and then you'll get the new season when it comes.
Exactly. And it's going to be a doozy. I know that for sure. So thank you so much, Sarah, for your time today.
Welcome. Thank you very much. Lovely to see you again.
Now, you can find the Content Rebels podcast wherever you listen. We'll also share a link in the show notes. Now, we did work with Sarah and the team at the Content Rebels to make the Content Rebels podcast. And if you're interested in doing the same, then head to podandpen.com.au to find out more. We do love a collaboration and work well with in-house marketing teams to get the best result for your brand or organisation. And who knows, you might be a nominee in next year's awards if you do. Until next time, happy listening.